Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast, your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flottam.
Hi, Jeff and Kim. As their name implies, A.H. Myers & Sons is a family-owned and operated company. They're now in their fourth generation, and the Myers family continues their beekeeping tradition with beeswax rendering services and manufacturing pallet clips. They secure your hive bodies to a pallet. They also produce and pack pure sweet clover honey. Their Howdy honey is extracted and packed in South Dakota. At their website, www.meyerhoneyfarms.com, look for their famous creamed honey made from a secret process. And by the way, Meyer is spelled M-E-Y-E-R.
Hey, Kim, I'm looking forward to today's guest, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren. I didn't know him until we saw the Pollinators film by director Peter Nelson. I'm looking forward to this. He sounds like he has some interesting ideas.
Yeah, I first saw him at a beekeeper meeting a couple of years ago, and he was, compared to some of the other speakers, dynamic, exciting, and informative and fun to listen to. So I too am looking forward to having a chat with him. You know, he's written a couple of articles for our magazine in the last few months, and they too have been well done and informative about pesticides and regenerative farming and things, and this should be good.
Yeah, well, let's call him up on Zoom and get it going. Well, we have Dr. Jonathan Lundgren on the phone right now, on Zoom right now, and Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me here. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have you here. And after watching you on, Kim and I had Peter Nelson on the last podcast, and we're able to watch you on his movie, The Pollinators. And so it's exciting to have you on the show today, too. Yeah,
that turned out really well. I had actually forgotten that I had hosted him out here, so it was a real surprise when I'm like, well, there's a movie.
And you're a star in it. That's great.
Well, that worked out real well.
John, good to see you again. I too enjoyed the movie. We got to preview it before we talked to Peter and saw your part in it. But if you would, you're part of the ECDYSIS Foundation working on Blue Dasher Farm. Share with us what those are and what your role there is and where you're headed, do you think?
So we're science and education and demonstration in regenerative agriculture, which is kind of the future of food production in the U.S. and beyond. But it's a much different approach to doing science than anything that I've been associated with in the past. I came from the USDA, and I worked there for 11 years on things like risk assessment and designing systems, cropping systems that didn't need pesticides or tried to reduce pesticide use. And then I started to meet farmers from all over the planet that were they were doing it, right? I mean, they were raising crops and livestock, and they didn't need to use pesticides anymore. They didn't use many agrochemicals at all, and they were more profitable than they ever had been before. And I was kind of like, man, that sounds really great. And so I tried to change the system from within, and that didn't work so well. And so I quit. And I decided that, this was really a time for transformation in our food system. And the bees are certainly an indicator that a transformation is really needed right now, right? With all of these bee die-offs. And so not only are we transforming how science is conducted, but we're also transforming, the way that we are approaching change in our food system. So very grassroots. We're crowd-funded primarily. We do get some competitive grant money, but the scientist has to be a farmer and a beekeeper. And that has totally changed the whole approach to how I conduct science. Having that firsthand experience, man, I was totally disconnected before, and I thought I was pretty connected, but I wasn't, right? So it's been quite a revolution. Beekeepers have been terribly supportive, wonderfully supportive, not terribly supportive, wonderfully supportive. And
thank you for that.
And we've been around for 3 years, and we're actually going to plan on expanding this year and adding maybe 1 or 2 new locations. So that's really exciting for us.
So are you performing field crop research? You've had a couple of articles in our magazines. You were in November 18 and February of 2019, and there are pictures of people out standing in your fields. And so what are they doing out there? What kind of research is going on?
Yeah, so all of our research is kind of done on farm. So we don't work on a research farm. That's total. Yeah, I argue that might be totally irrelevant, or not totally, but highly irrelevant research at this point. We're working with the farmers and ranchers who are changing how their systems. So they're not tilling the soil anymore. They're always having vegetation on the ground, even in cropland, annual cropland. Lots of plant diversity, and then they're integrating livestock and crops in the same place at the same time, which all of those characteristics are really, really good for bees. And so we're going out onto these farmers' places and onto these ranches all over the country now, and even up into Canada, and studying what it is that they're doing. That's been really exciting.
So they're kind of leading the way, and you're recording it?
Yeah, that's right. I think the first step in this process is just to validate what it is that they're doing. Just like when I was working with the beekeepers were telling me pesticides are killing the bees. And then the scientific community was kind of like, oh, it's a little gray, it's not real conclusive. And it's like, no, we need to validate what these guys are saying. And we used our science to help the beekeepers in that way, proving that neonicotinoids are major contributors. And at least, there's other, that was part of a much broader group of scientists who were doing that kind of work too, which is great. The first step in this process is just to validate that these farmers are actually doing what they're saying they're doing. So we've demonstrated that cornfields that have stopped using insecticides, they don't use any BT corn, they don't use any neonics on their corn. They're twice as profitable as their conventionally farmed neighbors. The insecticide-treated cornfields had 10 times more pests than the ones that were farming regeneratively. So that's huge.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, they're replacing pesticide use with diversity, with plant diversity. And by doing that, they're reestablishing old ecological ties that help to maintain pest populations at very low levels. And so it's been awesome. Oh, and then we were so I've got Tommy Fenster is a master's student. I just got back from California. We've been working in California almonds and trying to do this similar experiment to the one that we did in cornfields. We found regenerative almond production out there.
Oh, wow.
We showed, so we're pairing these up. This is the second year of the study. We're pairing up these guys who, don't disturb their ground. They've got permanent ground cover, perennial ground cover. A lot of times they'll graze underneath those almond trees, even with sheep or with chickens. A lot of my compost additions to those almonds. Those almond orchards have 10 times the water infiltration rate from their conventional neighbors. 1/3 more organic matter in the soil, and pest populations were exactly the same. We showed the data to one of our the regenerative almond producers, and then his conventional neighbor. And the conventional neighbor looked at the data and was like, "This can't be right. I sprayed 5 times. I sprayed my orchard 5 times. This guy who didn't spray at all should not have the same pest populations as I do." It's like this is just turning the whole system on its head.
How does the yield compare on those?
We haven't analyzed that data yet. It looks real good. So we're still getting, and then we're also going to get nutrient density off of that. soil microbial communities off of that, and then especially foodborne pathogens. Okay. So lots more to do on that study, but we've been running it on like almost $0. Patagonia just finally came in and kicked in a little bit of help for us. So that was really
I think the almond board would be interested in this.
Almond board originally told me that soil health won't work in almonds. So we just had to do it. I think we had to. So hopefully they'll come on now. I really hope that they come on now.
When you said foodborne pathogens, how is that in the soil, or what are you referring to there?
Well, we have all these E. coli and salmonella scares these days. And people think that that's because, oh God, it's because we got dirty soil or something like this, or it's living in the soil. The reality is that those pathogens are an artifact of a really disrupted, dead microbial community in the soil. And so, if you stop all vegetation in the soil and you apply, pesticides into the soil, that kills the microbial community. And the only microbes that can survive in that matrix are these foodborne pathogens. And so the almonds fall onto the ground and kaboom, it's like just an accident waiting to happen.
Wow. That's amazing, actually. And you'd think also with the concern would be, well, the manure from the chickens or the sheep or whatever is going to be problematic.
I know.
And you're finding it's not at all.
It's just the opposite.
That's good.
Yeah, that's going to be a game changer experiment. I can't wait to have that all finished. What we need to do, though, is we need to start getting these beekeepers who own land to start practicing these ideas. I mean, they're the ones who have the most to gain from this. And so if there's beekeepers that have almond orchards or even being just the voice for these research results, God, there's nobody that's more connected with the agricultural community than the beekeepers are. I mean, it seems like they know just about everybody, and I've learned so much from working with these beekeepers. So making them a voice in this change is going to be integral.
Going back to corn for a second, since I think, what did I read? There's like 89 million acres or something like that of corn. I mean, that is a very big chunk of land.
It is,
and it's. I think you were saying like over 90% of it is conventionally farmed. So to change that much land into a commodity-based crop, or from a commodity-based crop into a regenerative form would certainly make a big difference. But one of the things that you found when you were looking at this in the article was that these acres that were regeneratively farmed were producing less corn, yet they were more profitable because there were far fewer inputs going in.
Right.
But the argument, I'm sure the argument is going to be from some corner of this is that, yes, but we have all of these people we have to feed.
Right.
Is that an honest concern? I mean, because you hear at different times the reports of the silos and the storage is overflowing with soybean and overflowing with corn because they can't get rid of it. Right. I mean, is there a true concern there? Or is that a red herring?
I think it's a red herring. I mean, global food security is in no way tied to corn and soybean production. And the whole notion that farmers at this point, the majority of farmland is devoted to food production is a little bit laughable. I mean, when's the last time you walked over to the grain bin and grabbed a handful of yellow number 5 corn and took a bite, So grow food. Yeah,
that's a good one. I guess I was a little bit bigger picture, and if you went from commodity-based, any crop, almonds, for instance, to a regenerative, and that's why I asked you about yield on the almonds, and you're still looking at that number.
What they're finding is in rangelands, because we've got a project down in the southeastern U.S., and that's going to be transferred up to the northern plains here this year, working on regenerative rangelands versus conventionally produced rangelands. Beef production is as high, if not higher, on regeneratively In fact, that was one of the motivators for folks to go over to a regenerative sort of holistic or adaptive multi-paddock grazing system is that is the fact that, I mean, their conventionally overgrazed systems were not supporting the same amount of cattle as they used to.
That makes sense.
And with almonds, I don't think that that'll be much of a concern either. In the end, I mean, we got, well, you just said it, right? You said it was like 90 million acres of corn, and that's about a third of all acres planted is corn. So that means we've got nearly 300 million acres out there that we can grow food on, right?
Yep.
I mean, a small yielding, especially when it revitalizes rural communities because of the increased profitability of that ground. I mean, that's a small price to pay, if you ask.
You had one phrase in there that I really liked, and it kind of sums a lot of this up. You were looking at the intercropping and multi-cropping and all of this not tilling, and what you were doing is you were increasing organic matter, and you got to the point where you said I could predict the profitability of a piece of land by the amount of organic matter in it.
Yeah,
that is a metric. That is a wonderful metric.
Yeah. We give prizes to corn farmers in each state for how much yield they produce, and I sometimes I'll give a little bit of a bitch slap and be like, a well-trained monkey can grow 300 bushel corn if they put enough junk in it. It's not about the yields, right? It's about the profitability. And these corn farmers are the only reason they're in business right now too often is because of the subsidies that keep them alive. And that's not good for them. That's not good for the rest of the community either. So,
well, all of this, John, kind of puts it together when farmers are doing this regenerative agriculture. It requires a different mindset, and you have a phrase in your article. It's knowledge intensive versus tech intensive, and I'm gonna say I think the knowledge that a farmer needs to get this going is probably, but once it's going, it's almost self-maintaining, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. As farmers have gone this direction, it's been really cool to watch how excited they become. So when they ask, oh, well, how do we get into this? Do we just take one step at a time? And I say, no. What you want to maybe devote a small portion of your farm to a total system. Okay, so actually getting, going no-till, getting cover crops, crop diversity, field margins, bees, livestock, getting that all into like one little unit, okay, and then using that correctly, as opposed to trying to do 400 acres all at once. And then what that does is it ends up setting a hook for the farmer, and it's not long before they're both farming, because it's so much. I mean, farming today is like sitting in a cubicle on wheels.
Yeah.
It's I mean,
often air conditioned.
Yeah, right. Which I don't know. I think that there's a real hunger for reconnecting with the land.
I was at a meeting of Amish beekeepers not long ago, and one of them brought this article to my attention. He brought the magazine to the meeting to point out this article, and he just looked at me and he said, "Why haven't you figured this out yet?" Because basically, this is their style of farming. And he just, you've gotten so far away from it, but that was an interesting discussion.
And that's something that comes up a lot. It's like, well, this is the way grandfathers used to farm, and we got away from that for a reason, right? And I guess it is and it isn't. I mean, I'm not saying that we need to go back to pioneer days, right? I think there was a lot to learn from those early days. What industrialized agriculture did for us was show us the potential. But we've really plateaued in what we're able to achieve nowadays with an industrialized model. with technology. Technology has shown us the way, but now we can rely back on ecology and figure out how to tweak those earlier systems that our forefathers used to use in ways that really maximize the profitability of a piece of ground.
Using technology in a good way, I guess, or a different way.
Yeah.
Certainly, I don't want to say everything's bad, but
well, you become complacent, don't you? And beekeepers are just as guilty of this as anybody else. When you've got a technology that seems to be working, you become complacent, and you rely so heavily on that technology that it replaces the knowledge that used to support you. So that's a take-home message that I think we can all learn from.
2 strips in 6 weeks, and you don't have to worry about mites.
Yep, that's right.
Well,
isn't that true?
It worked for a while.
Yeah, I think the mites have outsmarted us on a lot of that. And of course, it's not a mite problem, right? This is actually a pesticide problem that makes those mites so much more effective at killing the hives. But that's a hornet's nest in its own.
You had, like I said, you've had a couple of articles in our magazine, and the other one was for the overview on pesticides, the use of pesticides in agriculture primarily. And you started out, if I recall, working with BT corn. And if tell me about that.
Well, BT corn was back in the late 90s and early aughts. This was going to change everything. It did change everything, didn't it? I mean, it really altered the course of farming, made farming industrially and corn on corn possible. And so there was a real scramble for trying to understand what the implications of this were. Because sociologically, I mean, oh my God, it was like, the idea of using genetically modified organisms as part of our food system and frankenfood was, it really got people's attention. And that galvanized, the EPA had been doing risk assessments on pesticides for probably 20 years at that point. I think 1980 was when the Red Book came out that kind of formalized risk assessment. But BT corn really put the feet to the fire of risk assessors and made us really start to think about the ways that pesticides and in this case, genetically modified crops affect non-target organisms. And then I'd argue that the next kind of even advance, we kind of hit so BT corn was like, I mean, oh my God, pesticides can have these weird, unpredicted effects. And then it sort of, petered out for a while, and then neonics hit. And that's been this other new real explosion in risk assessment. I mean, my goodness, the effects of neonics on various life histories of bees has been really profound. We've never had such a comprehensive set of data to look at the different effects of a pesticide compound on a single organism like that before. So it's really advanced our understanding.
Well, you brought up the neonics, and I know some about them. I keep hearing, I don't hear anything good about them because the people I talk to are the people that are being affected by them mostly. But neonics in groundwater, how bad is that problem? Is it a problem?
Well, I know it's in surface waters. I'm trying to think if I recall if it's also in groundwater. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the literature. But surface waters certainly are contaminated at a pretty, up to like 1,500 parts per billion, I think it is, nanograms per kilogram. I'd have to do the math on it. But at a pretty high rate.
And what's that doing? I mean, how many levels of Mother Nature is that affecting?
Well, today we just published a study that showed that white-tailed deer are being adversely affected by field-relevant doses of neonicotinoids. Increased fawn death, birth abnormalities, lethargy in the deer. So deer aren't that different from us, are they?
Not nearly different enough. And the study that came out not too long ago on just the loss of insect mass. I'm sure you're aware of that study.
Yeah.
Part of neonics are part of that. Some of that, all of that.
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah, I think and neonics aren't even the central issue that we're talking about here, right? There's a perception that neonics are somehow needed by farmers, and really that is an artifact of a simplified food system. Yes, to get back to your question, the insect die-off. So, we're talking to beekeepers a lot of times, and everybody understands that there's a bee crisis going on. This is not a bee problem. All right, this is not a bee problem. This is the worst mass extinction event that planet Earth has ever seen. Worse than when the dinosaurs died off. Okay, so insects in general are being obliterated. I think we've lost something like 60% of all insect biomass over the last 27 years. And that was in Germany. And we've got long-term data from the Dakotas here that spans the last 10 years working in cornfields. And it's remarkable how much less you see in cornfields than we saw even a decade ago. Pesticides are certainly a contributing factor to that.
Well, that's the whole clean windshield effect. I mean,
right.
20 years ago, you couldn't drive at night without having a washer fluid in your tank and your filler tank, and it's now I never wash my windshield.
No, it's just not necessary anymore. And then you tack on the fact that those insects are critical for plant communities and pollination and regulating plant communities. Food for birds, songbirds, game birds that we appreciate as wildlife, all the way up and down the food web. And you start to see the gravity of this situation.
One of the other topics that you brought up was the value of all of this intense management that's going on. How much per acre is being spent on seed, on protective chemicals, and the incentive for these companies to have farmers keep using them.
Yeah.
And you had a line in there that you said science is for sale. That really caught my attention.
Yeah, it is. Well, as research entities get larger, the bureaucracy and the administrative burden on those large institutions becomes greater, and there isn't a regular source of money anymore, and so you have to turn to some place to keep the business afloat, and that ends up coming from agro-industry. Most of the land-grant universities nowadays take large sums of money, and that influences. Maybe it doesn't influence the results that you get. Sometimes it does, or at least what's publicized. But certainly it influences the questions that are asked.
Oh, that's good.
Nobody wants to bite the hand that feeds them, and that's one of the reasons why I had to get out of that matrix. I think that as a small, punchy research entity, we're able to ask the questions that nobody else wants to, because we function at 10-20% of the budget that I used to when I worked at any other. So in terms of bang for your buck on research dollars, I mean, come on. And then we can jump on things like as farmers start to lose their asses on dicamba, or beekeepers lose their butts on dicamba, we can start to address those issues pretty darn quickly. At least start providing data that hopefully will spur other organizations to start paying attention.
Interesting. That's well, I like that part of the part of the article, and then you started to drill down a little bit, and you were, and I'm guilty of this. When I was working for USDA, I was guilty of this. What happens in a petri dish is not what happens in the field.
Right.
And I'm making field level predictions on the results from that petri dish, and that's part of the issue. But I think the other thing that you said was that there's really nobody watching.
No. I mean, there's this presumption, right, that you go down and you buy a jug down at the co-op or at the local hardware store, and that somebody's evaluated this thing and said it's safe. And I've been working in risk assessment for 20 plus years now. God, I'm getting old. I can tell you nobody is watching. I mean, how on earth could you? How could you? Chris Mullen he did some great work out at Penn State, and that group, Pettis was involved as well. And they just did some fantastic stuff looking at just pesticide contaminations. And one of the things that Chris had said was that there's 20,000 formulated pesticides in the U.S. How each of those formulated pesticides requires a risk assessment of itself, right? And none of it's done. None of that is done. And so, I mean, how on earth would you ever do something like that? How would you conduct risk assessments on that level? On so many chemistries, it's impossible. What we need is a total change in how we're doing research. I mean, we need like a Manhattan Project for the bee problem. You take some really good minds, put them into a room, lock them away, give them as much money as they need, and say, solve this problem. Suddenly you would have real transformational changes at the end of that, I think. It wouldn't be this, well, I got to get this Varroa thing going. Oh, no, I'm doing another risk assessment on pesticides. Then it's like, guys, solve the problem.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's outside the box thinking, which is really needed.
Well, what's next? What's coming up this summer on Blue Dasher Farm?
Well, we're going to be working in regenerative cropland. Some of these main suppliers like General Mills is interested in changing their supply chain. So we're going to be studying those farms that they are trying to get to go down a regenerative model. We're going to be working in rangelands in the Northern Plains, trying to get those guys to change their approach. There's no greater footprint in terms of good quality forage than the rangelands out in especially in the western part of the U.S. So I'm hoping that we can get bees out there and see how when these rangelands start changing their practices, how those things affect bees. And then the other thing that we're going to be working really hard on this bee issue. And I think if we had a decent investment, we could probably over the next 3 years give beekeepers a short-term solution that's natural and virtually free for solving their hive loss problems. Until we can change agriculture, because ultimately that's the only way that we're going to save the bees, right? So that's a bold statement, right? We could solve the bee problem in 3 years, but you know what? We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the traditional research venues, and we lost just as many bees this year, maybe even more than we did 10 years ago. Where is that investment getting us at this point? Let's change the way we think, for crying out loud. It's time for some transformational changes.
So, John, thank you for being here. One quick thing, John, if you said much of your funding was crowd, what was it?
Yeah.
So
crowdfunded.
There you go. Donation. If people want to help, how do they do that?
Go to yes, we're a 501c3. You can write tax deductible checks to us, and we will put that money to good use. We can't do it without you. And you can do, if you want to use PayPal, go to ecdysis.bio. That's ECDYSIS.bio. And that will get us, that'll get you to a donate page.
Great. Well, we'll get that link up in the podcast notes too, so that listeners can just go to the show notes and click away. It's a good organization.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks so much, John, for being with us today. I learned a lot, and I'm going to continue researching too, and because it's just a fascinating and needed subject. It is.
Lots of good things going on right now.
It really is. All right. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, take care.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Hey, that was a really good conversation with Dr. Lundgren. I really learned a lot. The whole time, Kim, that we were talking to him, I was thinking, there's something that I wanted to say, and this is really ringing a bell in the back of my head somewhere. And then it dawned on me after we hung up with him, and that my niece is a soil scientist down in Georgia. So I just want to do a shout out to my niece, Dr. Emily Ott, down in Georgia. And, well, what do you think, Kim?
Well, soil science, with a horticulture major, I took a number of soil science classes, and it was a fun time the whole time I took them. So I can see why she pursued that as a career, and I can see why Jonathan thinks it's so important.
Yeah, I asked her if soil scientists stuck together, but I don't think she appreciated the clay reference. I don't. That was really good. I think the exciting thing is that I had never really considered was the importance of all of the bacteria and all of everything in the soil community working to provide a clean environment. So that's one of the reasons why, because the soil is so sterile and not healthy, that we have problems with spores in the ground and viral problems and bacterial problems. And that was really enlightening for me.
Yeah, pretty much whenever we get in the way, we screw things up. Whether it's dirt or plants or bees or animals or the climate, we're really good at this.
I hear that a lot, even when I walk through the kitchen. You're in the way, but that's a different topic. All right, so yeah, it was a good talking with John, and I'm glad we got him on the podcast.
Well, I try to sum things up at the end of these, and I've got a page of notes here, and then I got another page of notes, and then I've got another page of notes, and there's no way I could sum this up. I want to hit some of the high spots that I felt were important, Jeff, so that hopefully what I encourage people to do is go back and listen to this again, because I know I've listened to it 3 times now, and every time I've listened to it, I was there in the first place. But every time I've listened to it, I've heard something different, something more, something better. So if you get a chance, folks, go back and take a listen to Jonathan, because there's a lot there. Starting with Blue Dasher Farm. I mean, he worked for the USDA. He tried to change USDA. USDA didn't budge, so he did the right thing. He got out and he started his own assessment, doing his own risk assessment work and trying to work with no pesticides. So what he's doing now, he's doing, like he said, on a shoestring. He's doing it for pennies on the dollar, the research that he's doing. And I like the research, the way he's approaching his research projects. He's not dictating the structure of the research. He's watching people do what they do and measuring the results.
Yeah.
Which is what you're going to do in research anyway. You're going to do something and then measure the results and see if it's significant or not. He's not getting in the way of these people. He's just letting them do what they do and then measuring the results. And I got to believe that, A, I can see why USDA was having a hard time with that, and B, I can see why science is for sale, because he's asking questions people don't want to hear. I mentioned the fact that I went to that beekeepers meeting, Amish beekeepers meeting, and they are both farmers and beekeepers. And if you notice, one of the things that Jonathan stressed is that scientists have to be farmers and beekeepers, and the Amish pointed that out to me right now. Why haven't you people figured this out? So he touched on that. He touched on how people are dealing with soil no-till and putting livestock on it, and the reduced number of soil pests and plant pests that you have when you do this. He's looking at regenerative almonds. What a cosmic thought that is. If you've never been to an almond orchard, it's a living room carpet. There is nothing on an almond orchard floor, because they want it that way, because when they harvest, they shake the tree and the nuts, and then they've got a machine that comes and picks up the nuts, and you don't want stuff in the way. And I'm not sure how that's working with livestock in there, but it appears to be. It's improved water infiltration. I've got to believe it's improved yield. If nothing else, they're getting more water soaking into the ground for the same amount of water applied to the orchards that aren't like this. So it's got to be helping. And I think, just basically summing up what he said at the very beginning, regenerative agriculture. We have taken commodity products, I think, too far.
Yeah.
And what we're doing now is more bad than good. The farmers that are practicing these things are making more money. They're staying in business longer. They're doing better, and they're doing far, 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 far less damage to their farms, their soil, their production, and our health and well-being. So, good for you, Jonathan. Keep it up.
Absolutely. And I that was the other thing I caught that I found very interesting, was that the farmers who are doing the regenerative agriculture and farming, the yields are about the same, if not a little bit less, but they're making more money because they weren't spending as much in chemicals and fertilizers and everything else they need to do to try to get something to grow. And so, thanks, Jonathan. That is fantastic. Great work. Well, that about wraps it up for this podcast, Kim. But before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcast or wherever you download or stream your podcast. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. We also want to thank this week's sponsor, H. Meyer & Sons. H. Meyer's is 4th-generation family-owned business working with beekeepers since the 1930s. And known for their wax rendering and paying cash for their US beeswax, they also provide other great products and services. Check them out today at meyerfarms.com, and that's MEYERHONEYFARMS.com. And while you're there, give them a shout out for sponsoring this great program with Dr. Jonathan Lundgren. Also, feel free to send us questions and comments to questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. We've been hearing from some viewers or listeners, and it's a great exchange. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener. You are the reason we are doing this. Right, Kim?
They should all get a shout out, Jeff.
That's right. All right. You have a good week.
All right. Well, too. Thanks, Jeff.
Take care. Bye-bye.